Hello, I'm Mark Goldbridge, and today I'm going to talk to you about the one player that I think defines Manchester United past, present and future. A few weeks ago I tweeted up a tweet and basically said that you can define a real Manchester United fan by what they know about Duncan Edwards. Quite a few people agreed with that, but also quite a few people didn't. It's not a competition, folks. For me, Duncan Edwards is the most defining player in Manchester United's history, and I'll come on to that why in a moment. If you don't know who he is and you proclaim to support Manchester United, I'm not going to criticise you for it, but if you watch this video or listen and hear the name and don't bother to find out what he was, what he means to the club, then I think you're missing out on quite a lot. And the full story about Manchester United is better than any club in the world, and that's what makes Manchester United so important to so many fans out there. So Duncan Edwards, who was he, what happened to him, and why is he so important? Well, many of you will know that he was one of the original Busby Babes who died in Munich in 1958, well, a couple of weeks afterwards. But as a player, many people have said he was the greatest player, or would have been the greatest player to ever, certainly British player, had he lived. And when he died at the young age of 21, he wasn't far off being the best player anyway. In fact, the year before he'd been named the third best player in European football behind Di Stefano and Billy Wright. Made his debut for England at 18 years and 8 months, the youngest player at the time when he did that. And had 21 caps when he died for England. But more importantly, he was a Manchester United legend. And I don't say this lightly. I know a lot about Duncan Edwards. I've got the book. He's on my show every week with me, and he's an important player to me. And I was fortunate enough that my grandfather worshipped him, saw him play, and I grew up with Manchester United, with the greats: Charlton, Best, Edwards, the Busby Babes. I didn't grow up watching them, and obviously I'm not old enough, but I grew up with the stories of them, and I'll be forever grateful for that. And I feel grateful and privileged that Duncan Edwards has always been some part of my life, and somebody that I have always known was the most important player in Manchester United's history. I've visited the cemetery in Dudley where he's buried many a time, and it is a very humbling experience when you start to understand what a club is, more than just what it is in your lifetime. Manchester United is the greatest club in the world for me, and that's in no small part because of the history. But I suppose the critics would say of Duncan Edwards, well, he died at 21, and there's just that feeling of the fact that he died. There's a sympathy towards that, and people just say he was the greatest player without really him being that greatest player. Well, I think when you look at that argument and you assess how good Duncan Edwards was, there's two things for me. One, I don't know whether we fully understand how good the Busby Babes were. An unprecedented tragedy where many young men, talented footballers, lost their lives, and a total tragedy, like I say. But when people say that they were amazing, would have been fantastic, and at that time were the most exciting thing in world football, it's not an understatement, folks. They really were. They were going to go on to, I think England quite easily lost out on 2 World Cups. Manchester United lost out on probably another 2-3 European Cups and league titles as well. They really were that good. A team full of talent, and it wasn't as if Duncan Edwards was the one player in a team that was okay. It was a team that was full of talent. Tommy Taylor, the striker who died in Munich, prolific striker for England and Manchester United, was in his prime when he died, 26 years of age. Roger Byrne, the captain, the best captain in the country at the time, 28 years old when he died. David Pegg, a fantastic left winger, young lad, 21 like Duncan, would have gone on to great things. And the same with Eddie Coleman, a fantastic talent, and the team was full of it. Duncan Edwards was probably the best player in that team, with the leader, courage, determination, ability, skill. He had absolutely everything. And I'll come on to Bobby Charlton, who obviously survived that, and I think Duncan Edwards, Sir Bobby Charlton said that he's the best player that he ever played with, and not only that he was the only player that he played on the same pitch with where he felt inferior to. And I think for Sir Bobby Charlton to say that, you cannot underestimate how good Duncan Edwards was. Bobby Charlton played with everybody from Pele, Best, Beckenbauer, and he's seen everybody. And to say that about Duncan Edwards, who died at 21, is it's amazing for me, and that is why he is such an important player in Manchester United's history and must never be forgotten. And I think that's the point of this video, really, is that everybody who watches, please do look into Duncan and the Busby Babes and understand that it was a tragedy, but it wasn't. Whilst it was a tragedy, the pudding hasn't been over egged by how good those players were. They really were and would have been the best team of that era. They had so much potential, and it was a tragedy, one, for the loss of life, but two, because of the quality of football player that they lost. And Manchester United were decimated. So many of them died, and they came back, and within 10 years we had that great trilogy of Charlton, Law and Best, who won it in '68 for St Match after such a devastating loss. And I think when in the modern day it's hard to relate to what that loss would be, but I saw somebody in an article I read preparing for this said that the equivalent of losing Duncan Edwards would be like losing Wayne Rooney or David Beckham at 20, but magnifying that by 10. He was that good. In the modern day, unrelatable really. Had the determination, fight and skill of the best captain you can think of, but the shot of a Bobby Charlton, and never stopped running, and really would have been the greatest player potentially in the world, but certainly in British football. And England and Manchester United would have been all the better for it. But that's why Duncan Edwards is so important to me. That's why I think Duncan Edwards is the most important player in Manchester United's history, and that's why I don't believe Duncan Edwards should ever be forgotten. And that's why my advice to any Manchester United fan out there is to look at Duncan Edwards, is to do your research on him. It's very easy. And the Busby Babes, and see just what we lost in 1958. And I'm going to leave you with one thing I read today. It was a quote from one of Duncan Edwards' greatest friends when he died, and that he basically said that, in a way, dying at 21 after the injuries he'd sustained, multiple fractures to his legs and internal damage, that it was a miracle that he lived for 2 weeks after the plane crash. But his friend said that in a way it's better that Duncan died at 21, and that's obviously not coming across properly, but what he meant was that the doctors had basically said if Duncan had lived, he never would have played football again. The injuries were that bad to his leg. And his friend said that Duncan wouldn't wanted that. All he wanted to do was play football. He loved Manchester United. All he ever wanted to do was play for Manchester United. And without football, he'd have been a miserable man. I'm sure he would have wanted to live. Nobody wants to die at 21, but a tragedy what happened to them. And Duncan Edwards, for me, is the best player Manchester United ever had, and in a way, never had. Thanks for watching. It's been a pleasure doing this. I'm Mark Goldbridge. This is Soccer Box. Out.